Good morning. Welcome to Glazing with AMACO. This is Kara, and today I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'm using Blue Rutile PC-20, and I'm using this glaze today because I wanted to show how different glazes, especially the glazes with float in them, which Blue Rutile is one of our float glazes, really need a thick application to get the best effect. Some of the things that happen with Blue Rutile, the most common is people end up with sort of a brown glaze with just a little hint of blue, and they're frustrated. Where'd the blue go? Why is this glaze coming out brown when it's supposed to be blue? Well, the problem is that if you don't get a thick enough application, you're not going to have the blue float, you're just going to have brown. So as an example, I made a tile. This is Blue Rutile, 1 coat, 2 coat, 3 coat, 4 coat, 5 coat, and 6 coat. And you can see how it breaks across the surface, but at 1 coat it's mostly brown with just a little bit of blue where it's thick. Where you have 2 coats, you start getting a little bit more blue, but even here at the edges it's still pretty dark. At 3 coats you start getting a really nice float. 4 is even better. 5, you start getting a little too thick and you start losing some of the details. And 6 coats is very thick, and at this rate, this was a flat tile, so you don't see it running, but if it was on a vertical surface, it would almost certainly be running off of the pot. So you want to get somewhere in the middle. If you do a tile like this, it will show you a bit better what kind of results you'll get. Because everybody glazes a little differently, I recommend that people do this when they're first getting used to a glaze so that they can see how they glaze. Do you glaze a little light? Do you glaze a little heavy? Maybe your 2 coats looks like my 1 coat. Maybe your 1 coat looks like my 2 or 3 coats. It just depends on how you glaze. It can depend on your brushes. So that's another thing, is that I recommend that people use natural fiber fan brushes or Hake brushes. Natural fiber brushes are more expensive, but they do hold and release glaze much better than synthetic fiber brushes. So you're going to get a more even application from a natural fiber brush than a synthetic fiber brush. So that's my tile. This was fired at cone 5. Oh, I'm sorry, cone 6. Cone 6, and it was on 46M, which is our buff stoneware. So it's going to be a little bit more brown than if you're using a white clay, but it's a fairly light color clay body. And I'm gonna go with the 3 to 4 coat. I think 3 coats is going to look just fine on the vase that I have here today. And this has already been washed off, wiped down, and this, in case you're wondering, this is 11M, so it's going to look a little bit different. But this was water etched, so this was made by an intern who works with us, and after throwing it, she applied either wax, or I think in this case it was shellac, and then sponged the vase down with a wet sponge to remove the clay, so you have this raised surface. It's subtle, but it's really nice and natural looking. So I'm going to shake my glaze. Try not to shake my table. I'll give you guys some motion sickness there. Now, to get the inside, My glaze is thin enough. You can see that it's moves quite a bit. The glaze is thin enough that I can pour it in. I'm just going to do one really quick pour and then pour it right back out. Do not do multiple pours. I have tried this before, so I know that Blue Rutile likes to do this. One of the things we sometimes have seen is people have found that their Blue Rutile comes out rather green. And in those cases, when it has come out green, it's almost always, not always, but almost always, it's not been fired to cone 5. If the glaze is not mature enough, it will come out green. And I think there might be some clay bodies that also encourage the Now, if your glaze is too thick to pour, you can add water and Suspend-Aid to do a brushing and pouring kind of technique. The Suspend-Aid keeps the glaze from settling. You see how I reload my brush often. I find, I know that a lot of people find glazing to be rather tedious and difficult to, it's very time consuming to brush on glazes. I find if I have everything set up and ready, that it's rather meditative. But having everything ready to go really helps so that you're not hunting around for the right brush or some other thing. Make sure that it's all nice and thick. Now, I get asked about gum solution sometimes. One of the things that gum solution does that you'll notice is different if you're using a dipping glaze or a glaze that doesn't contain gum solution is the glaze dries really, really quickly. So when we add the gum solution, the glaze dries slower. This allows it to adhere to the wear a little bit better as well. And it also lets us get a nice even coating instead of it like, globbing. So that is why dipping glazes that don't have the gum solution are not meant for brushing, and you might not be very successful if you try to brush with them without adding gum solution. It helps the glaze. Another thing to keep in mind that you can do is to actually measure the thickness of your glaze with a tool. So, I'm pretty sure that the glaze is thick enough where I've poured it. And I'm going to take my needle tool and poke it in to kind of see how thick it is. And it's relatively thin. You don't want to get thicker than the thickness of a dime. And then where I poked it, I'm going to dab a little more glaze on there, which is just millimeters. But if it's too thin a coat of glaze, it's not going to look right, as we've already seen. Now, for this, I can't really handle it by the inside. Normally I'd stick my fingers inside and hold it so that I can glaze around the foot. It's hard to do that. And I don't have my banding wheel here, since it's distracting. So I'm going to go all the way to the foot, glaze on my table, not a problem. And I'll go back with a sponge and just touch it up. Now, I'm going to keep in mind that this glaze can move a little bit, so I may feather it down so that it's only 2 coats as it gets to the last ½ inch before the bottom of the pot. This little pot does not have a foot with a catch to slow the glaze down, which I like to put on pieces. I like to have a foot that's a little bit defined that'll slow the glaze down when it runs. But that works pretty well. And as long as I know the behavior of my glaze, it's not really a scary proposition to go all the way down to the foot. Most of the PC glazes, you probably have seen where I've said this in our group, most of the PC glazes, as long as they're used by themselves, they mostly will not run off the pot. But in combination, if you're layering it, even two normally stiff glazes, when combined, can create a lower eutectic point. They can create a eutectic point that causes the glaze to run a lot more, to flux a lot more than it normally would. It's just one of the wonderful and fascinating things about glaze. It can also be a little disappointing when you combine glazes and you don't realize that they're going to do that. So this glaze is drying pretty nicely under these lights, so you can see how, I missed a spot, not a problem. If at some point I feel like the glaze the brush is dragging on the glaze, then I need to go back and make sure that I reload my brush and get enough glaze on there. So I'm going to finish the third coat off camera, and if any of you have any questions about making tiles showing the thickness of your glazes, or about float glazes, or about Blue Rutile specifically, just drop me a comment and I will answer those later today. And next week, due to Thanksgiving and the shortened week, we will not have a live video, but I will be back the week after, so 2 weeks from today. I will be back and I will be doing a live feed with the smugs, the semi-moist underglazes, on top of satin matte glazes. Oh, I do have one thing I wanted to remind everybody of, is that we have light coat, medium coat, 1 coat, 2 coat, 3 coat, light, medium, heavy glaze tiles for most of the PC glazes are on the page for PC glazes. So go to AMACO.com and pick the pull down menu for glazes and underglazes and find the PC glazes, and you can find light, medium, and heavy coat tiles for all of the PCs that we have tiles of those for, and as well as a lot of other information. If you have not checked out our PC Glaze page before, there are lots of resources on it, so I encourage you to go there. And before I go, I'll just say, just go to and check out our Potter's Choice page. Okay, so you can find things like not just layering and thin, medium, and heavy coats of glaze, but also Potter's Choice glazes on different clay bodies, and Potter's Choice glazes at Cone 10, and some other resources as well. Lots of things to check out. So go to our website. We have lots of resources to share with you, and I will be seeing you in the group. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great afternoon.